The 427th Annual Galactic Medical Conference was unfolding exactly as you'd expect, as thrilling as watching a plasma coolant leak slowly empty into a vacuum. Imagine a Xenian monk meditating for 5,000 years, getting so bored that they might just snap. That's the vibe. In the Grand Assembly Hall of New Singapore's Interstellar Convention Center, delegates from every corner of the galaxy sat, fidgeting with their holographic devices, pretending to care about Dr. Vokta's 3-hour presentation on the merits of proper tentacle hygiene. Honestly, Jack Patterson didn't even want to be here. He wasn't a fan of sitting through lectures. He had better things to do, like catching up on medical reports and tossing mints into his mouth like a pro. But hey, it's not every day you get to be the first human to ever be invited to speak at the Galactic Medical Conference, right? So, Dr. Jack Patterson, he preferred to be called Patch, found himself in the back row, feet up on an empty chair, snacking on mints with the casual attitude of someone who knew they were about to stir up some cosmic chaos. Patterson wasn't even supposed to be on the agenda. His reputation as the first human to successfully reattach a severed arm while trapped in a malfunctioning elevator wasn't what he'd consider groundbreaking. But apparently, galactic officials did. Jack thought it was just another Tuesday. Ambassador Clix TX, the conference's chief organizer and a respected authority on xenomedicine, stood at the podium, exuding the enthusiasm of a malfunctioning vending machine. Looking like a cross between a praying mantis and a peacock in a reading glasses ensemble, Clix adjusted their antennae before droning, "Next up, we have Dr. Patterson from Earth, presenting his groundbreaking paper on emergency trauma surgery in gravity-variable environments." Jack sauntered up to the podium with the swagger of someone who knew how to rock a scalpel, his grin set firmly in place, the kind of grin that made nurses feel safe, yet double-check their coffee for salt. He approached the microphone, ready to set the stage for what would undoubtedly be the most entertaining session of the conference. "Thanks, Ambassador," Jack said casually, clicking through his presentation slides with an effortless flick. "Funny story about that elevator surgery." The first slide flashed onto the screen, showing a graphic image of the patient's before and after arm reattachment. Several delegates from different species immediately began changing colors, shifting shades that would have been concerning if it weren't for the humor of the situation. Jack carried on with his story, his nonchalant demeanor not even hinting at the massive cultural upset he was about to cause. "So, yeah, the reattachment was pretty standard stuff. Clean the wound, align the vessels, get everything back where it belongs. The challenge came in keeping the patient's inflammation response under control while new tissue was forming." The hall fell into dead silence. Even the ambient hum of the environmental systems seemed to pause in anticipation. Ambassador Clix TX's antenna twitched with something that might have been alarm. Jack looked around, realizing that something was off. The entire room was still, expectantly waiting for more. "Wait, what did you say?" Clix TX asked, their voice rising slightly, though they tried to maintain composure. "New tissue growth?" "Yeah," Jack said, shrugging casually. "Standard human healing process. Inflammation triggers tissue regeneration, new cells form, blood vessels rebuild. You know, basic stuff. But I guess in a zero-gravity environment, the swelling's a bit more interesting." The crowd looked on, absolutely silent. Some of them were backing away slowly. Others were gripping their chairs. And then, from the corner of the room, a crystalline delegate, who was quite literally made of floating crystals, shattered in distress. The ambassador's voice was nearly a squeak. "You mean, you actively grow new organic material to repair damage?" Yeah," Jack said, realizing his audience was growing pale. "Inflammation, repair cells, tissue regeneration, pretty standard. It's just biology." Ambassador Clix TX's exoskeleton emitted a sound that could only be described as the cracking of ice. "Humans? Humans actually heal this way? By growing new flesh?" Jack scratched his head, not quite understanding why this was such a big deal. Wait, so how do you folks heal wounds? Civilized methods, Clicks TX said, as if the answer should have been obvious. Synthetic tissue replacement, controlled cellular regeneration, biomechanical repairs, not this barbaric process of forcing your bodies to spawn new flesh. The room froze. The ambient hum of the environmental systems returned, but it was more of a nervous buzz now. Jack looked around at the shocked faces, realizing that this had just escalated from a simple conference presentation to a full-blown existential crisis for the galaxy. "You're telling me," Jack said slowly, his grin widening, "that you guys don't use inflammation as part of your healing process? No wonder your recovery times are so slow." "Speaking of which," he continued, pointing at Clicks TX's twitching antenna, "you might want to get that checked out. Looks a bit inflamed." The ambassador let out a sound that could only be described as a squeal of pure terror, their antennae practically vibrating off their head. And just like that, the Galactic Medical Conference, already dull enough to make a Xenian monk snap, exploded into chaos. What had started as a relatively boring session on tentacle hygiene turned into the greatest intergalactic medical incident in history. Jack Patterson, with his casual demeanor and knack for bad timing, had just shattered millennia of xenobiological knowledge. The rest of the galaxy would never be the same again. 4 hours after what was quickly being dubbed the flesh-growing incident, an emergency meeting of the Galactic Medical Council was called. The actual conference rooms were still being decontaminated after several species experienced a variety of, well, biological reactions to the presentation, everything from fainting to panic-induced flight. The meeting had to take place in a janitor's closet, not that anyone was actually using the closet for its intended purpose. The walls were covered in holographic medical posters and diagnostics of various species' healing processes. If only the situation weren't so dire. General Blur of the Galactic Defense Force, who occupied approximately half of the available space with their gelatinous form, hovered anxiously in the corner. Known for their intimidating, unflappable presence, General Blur was currently vibrating nervously, a rare sight for someone whose species had evolved to be disturbingly calm under pressure. It was a bit like watching a blob of Jell-O desperately trying to hold itself together. "This is unprecedented," Blur's voice bubbled, vibrating through their translator. "In all my years of maintaining galactic security, I've never encountered a species that just grows back." Ambassador Clicks TX, who had spent the last hour attempting to soothe their now massively inflamed antennae with universal-grade calming agents, nodded gravely. "According to Dr. Patterson's medical records, which I've had thoroughly analyzed by our best xenobiologists, humans not only regenerate tissue naturally, they consider this process normal." A floating consciousness from the xenobiology department flickered into existence. "Wait, are you saying humans don't just heal their wounds by synthesizing tissue? They grow new flesh? How is that not dangerous?" Another delegate, a tall creature composed of what appeared to be dense, swirling gas, began to mutter in disbelief. "How do they control this growth? What if they regenerate indefinitely? What if their limbs multiply or immortality? What stops them from becoming unstoppable?" "Well, that's the truly terrifying part," Ambassador Clicks TX said, pulling up a holographic display of human medical data. "They don't control it. The process is entirely autonomous. The body just decides to repair itself without oversight or committee approval." The room erupted into a cacophony of concerned chatter. Various species, most of whom had advanced methods of synthetic tissue replacement and cellular engineering, seemed to have gone into full-on panic mode. "How do they control it?" General Blur asked, still struggling with the concept. Their translucent body rippled with nervous energy. "What stops them from regenerating out of control, growing multiple heads, becoming weaponized?" "We don't!" Clicks TX snapped, visibly agitated. That's the issue. They just heal in whatever way their body decides. No check, no balance. And apparently, if a human is injured and undergoes some damage, their muscles actually get stronger during the healing process. They adapt to stress. They exercise on purpose to make their muscles grow. There was a collective pause. A telepathic delegate's mind seemed to crackle with confusion. Exercise? They deliberately damage their bodies for gain? Yes, Clicks TX replied, drawing an exasperated breath. And it's not even just one type of damage. It's the result of micro-trauma, something that the humans seem to enjoy. It's all about triggering those inflammation responses to stimulate tissue regeneration. They have an entire sport around it. They weaponized it. General Blur's form rippled with alarm. We must take immediate action to contain this threat. They are a biological hazard. This healing is far beyond what we ever imagined. Contain? The head of xenobiology asked, his consciousness flickering thoughtfully. Yes, perhaps we should study it, observe it. It is, after all, a biological anomaly. We can document their process scientifically. Observe how their bodies repair themselves. Yes, scientific research, of course. Oh, absolutely, General Blur agreed, nodding so vigorously that several layers of their gelatinous form nearly splattered across the room. We must act swiftly. We can study them. I propose we start with Dr. Patterson. He's the most typical example of their kind. Clicks TX paused, scrolling through Jack's medical records with a touch of horror. Dr. Patterson's records indicate he once performed surgery while having 3 broken fingers. He simply walked it off. I'm not sure that's typical. The meeting was descending into madness. Debates raged across the room. Should they observe the humans in their natural healing environments? Could they safely contain them for the good of the galaxy? Could they isolate a single human for study without triggering a wider panic? Or worse, was there a human healing weapon they hadn't yet considered? And while all of this frantic strategizing unfolded, the last thing anyone noticed was a small maintenance bot in the corner, calmly transmitting the entire conversation directly to Dr. Patterson's personal phone. After all, cleaning drones were just that, drones. And in Jack's world, you could always count on someone to be eavesdropping when you least expected it. Back in the chaos of New Singapore General Hospital, where the usual mayhem had been heightened by a strange mix of alien observers and impending intergalactic crisis, Jack had no idea what was brewing. All he cared about was that the coffee had been particularly good today. Lynn, tell me that's the good stuff, Jack said, holding out a cup as the medical drone buzzed overhead. Nurse Lynn Band-Aid Rodriguez, who had already been dealing with an escalating disaster involving malfunctioning medical drones, raised an eyebrow. Alien observers, you're surrounded by them. Jack took the coffee, savoring the bitter jet-black brew that was practically a performance-enhancing drug for humans. I'm starting to think we've got an audience today. They've been watching me since I popped my thumb back in during that Hikari trauma. Definitely have a few interested parties out there. Don't tell me, are they still freaking out about the paper cut incident? Oh, absolutely. They've been whispering about your uncontrolled regenerative capabilities like it's an emergency. I've got to hand it to you, Doc. I haven't seen this many species panic since the Hazar incident. Jack grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. If they only knew how far I've taken this. Lynn, it's time for a little show and tell. They were about to make the whole galaxy think humans were walking weapons. Again. And if they did it right, it would be another Tuesday Jack Patterson would never forget. The air in New Singapore General Hospital was thick with tension. Nurses and doctors worked frantically, trying to keep their usual level of chaos under control while a group of alien observers, who were less subtle and more definitely not hiding their antennae, watched their every move. The presence of these visitors from the stars wasn't exactly a secret. They had been following Jack's every action since he'd casually reattached a severed arm in a malfunctioning elevator. The aliens had found the concept of human healing quite fascinating, but the method? Well, that was a whole other story. Jack had learned that his casual presentation on human healing biology had set the intergalactic medical community into a complete meltdown. After all, what was more terrifying than a species that could heal itself by simply growing new tissue? Apparently, the very concept of autonomous tissue regeneration without proper oversight had caused a few minor panic attacks among some of the galaxy's more fragile species. The result? A containment team was now on their way, and Jack had a feeling they didn't just want to have a chat. "Lynn, remind me again how we got ourselves into this mess," Jack asked, sipping his coffee like he had all the time in the world. Lynn, who had been busy juggling alien observation reports, medical charts, and fending off a malfunctioning medical drone with her clipboard, shot him a wry smile. "You told them coffee was a regeneration serum." Right, Jack said, grinning despite himself. "But hey, it is pretty effective. You should see the alien reactions when I drink this stuff." A voice crackled overhead, mechanical, stern, and entirely unimpressed. "Dr. Patterson," it said, "this is General Blur. By order of the Galactic Security Council, we are requesting that you stand down and prepare for containment." The voice sounded like it was coming from a speaker, but Jack could almost hear the ominous squelching of jelly from the General's vibrating form. "Containment?" Jack said, rolling his eyes. "For what exactly?" "My coffee addiction? I didn't think caffeine was a crime yet." He tossed another mint into his mouth, unfazed. Lynn was already holding up her phone, tapping into the hospital-wide comms. "You're right, Doc," she said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "But I think we might need to give them a proper demonstration before they decide to slap us with containment protocols." "You have a plan?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. Lynn leaned in, her eyes glinting mischievously. "Oh, I've got a few ideas, but first let's give them something to really freak out about." Jack raised his cup of coffee in acknowledgement. "Go on then. Let's show them how humans weaponize their healing abilities." It didn't take long for Lynn to mobilize the hospital staff into action. With the precision of a well-executed performance, everyone, doctors, nurses, even the patients, began participating in the most ridiculous demonstration of human resilience ever witnessed in a medical facility. The staff started casually talking about the impressive regenerative capabilities of human tissue while performing absolutely absurd feats of endurance. Dr. Ramirez, an old pro at playing along with Jack's antics, loudly discussed how he had walked off a broken toe last week, causing the first alien observer, who had unfortunately been disguised as a potted plant, to nearly fall over in panic. But the pièce de resistance was Jack himself. He casually strolled through the hallway, past the small army of alien observers who were struggling to hide their panic, and stepped into the break room, where Lynn was already waiting. "Time for a little coffee-fueled chaos," Jack grinned, his hands hovering over the coffee machine as if it were some sacred artifact. Lynn grabbed a mug. "I've prepped the special stuff," she said, and with a flick of her wrist, she poured a mysterious dark brew into Jack's cup. It was a coffee blend that could send even the most hardened ER doctors into a full-on caffeine frenzy. The stuff that got Dr. Chen through his 72-hour shift last month. You know, the one he spent ranting about intergalactic protocols while simultaneously getting dunked in alien smoothies. Jack's eyes lit up. Perfect. With a dramatic flourish, he raised his cup toward the watching aliens, who had gathered in the corner trying to be discreet, but failing miserably. "This," Jack said, his voice carrying with a dangerous amount of casual confidence, "is the true secret of human regenerative capabilities." Lynn rolled her eyes. "Here we go again," she muttered. but she was already recording the entire thing on her phone, knowing full well that this would be a viral sensation by the time the day was over. With exaggerated solemnity, Jack took a sip of the coffee. As the caffeine hit his bloodstream, his energy surged. He made a show of tapping his fingers against the counter, his leg bouncing slightly from the raw, jittery power of the coffee coursing through him. "Ah," Jack said, raising an eyebrow. "That's the stuff. You see, humans don't actually regenerate anything supernaturally. We just heal a little faster. It's all about this beautiful process of—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Inflammation." At that exact moment, the containment team barged into the break room. In their hands, they carried a variety of strange containment devices designed to subdue humans who were potentially regenerating uncontrollably. They looked at Jack, their equipment aimed at him, trying to seem menacing, though given their slick armor and poorly chosen sci-fi movie fashion, it was more comical than threatening. "Dr. Patterson," the leader of the containment team said, holding up what looked like a laser gun, "stand down. You are a biological hazard. We are here to contain you for study of your dangerous regenerative capabilities." Jack looked at them, his grin widening. "Contain me?" he asked. "Do you really think you're going to stop me after I've had my coffee? I've broken records in the ER while my body was actively rejecting medical protocols. What makes you think you're going to contain a little caffeine-induced healing?" Lynn laughed, walking up next to him, her eyes glinting with the same chaotic energy. "We're not dangerous. We're just efficient and hyperactive." A containment officer raised what looked like a very official weapon aimed at Jack. "Do not resist. We are authorized to use anti-regeneration countermeasures." Jack raised his hand in mock surrender, but with a twinkle in his eye. "Do you really think anti-regeneration tech is going to stop me from breaking Dr. Chen's mini marshmallow record?" He popped a mini marshmallow into his mouth, just for emphasis. The containment team hesitated, clearly confused by the absurdity of the situation. "You can't just—" Jack had already darted over to the vending machine and punched in the code for a new package of marshmallows. "Watch and learn," he said, as he began to catch marshmallows in his mouth with impressive accuracy. The team stood there, unsure whether to respond with aggression or confusion. Lynn was in the background, recording it all on her phone. The aliens' disbelief deepened as they watched Jack casually devour marshmallows, now completely ignoring their containment protocols. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" the leader of the containment team said, his voice dripping with frustration. "Yeah," Jack grinned, tossing another marshmallow into his mouth. "A whole new intergalactic trend. Just wait until the video hits the holonets. The Great Marshmallow Regeneration Incident of 2074. Trust me, you'll be famous." The containment team, realizing they were utterly defeated by the most bizarre situation they'd ever encountered, exchanged looks of bewilderment. Their bluster evaporated. Let's get back to the containment protocols," the leader muttered, as the team slowly backed out of the break room, still trying to process what had just happened. "Well, that went well," Jack said, turning to Lynn with a satisfied grin. "The containment team's probably still trying to figure out what happened, but we've got some time to kill." "Yeah," Lynn agreed, watching as the containment officers disappeared. "And if you ever need help breaking records, just let me know. The aliens loved it." Jack chuckled. "Oh, I think next year's conference is going to be interesting." And just like that, the whole hospital had become the setting for an interplanetary incident, all thanks to a cup of coffee, a mini marshmallow challenge, and an absurd demonstration of what humans do best: heal, adapt, and cause complete chaos in the process. The following day, the Galactic Council was convening an emergency session. The topic? Human regenerative capabilities, again. But this time, the stakes were much higher. The Great Marshmallow Incident had been all over the galactic news networks. broadcasted as the Great Human Containment Catastrophe of 2074. The video of the containment team slipping on marshmallows and crashing into a Jell-O table had gone viral, causing both amusement and widespread panic across the galaxy. General Blur's form, which was usually a calm and commanding presence, was now a quivering mess of translucent jelly. They'd spent most of the night processing footage from the hospital, trying to make sense of what happened. As of now, they were unsure whether to consider humans a genuine threat or simply an unsolvable enigma. In truth, it was the kind of crisis that didn't belong in a galactic defense manual, because there was no protocol for a species that could potentially heal faster than you could figure out what happened. As the meeting began, Jack and Lynn entered the chamber with the same casual confidence they'd shown the previous day. They'd been invited to the emergency session to explain themselves. But honestly, they were more interested in seeing how much more absurd this could get. Ambassador Clix TX, still looking flustered from the previous day's chaos, was already standing at the podium, trying desperately to maintain some semblance of order. "This emergency session of the Galactic Medical Council is now in session," they began, their voice strained. "We are here to address the serious and concerning nature of recent events. Dr. Patterson and his regenerative capabilities are a matter of grave concern to galactic security." Jack stepped up to the podium, his ever-present grin firmly in place. He had that look, the kind of grin that could put everyone at ease and simultaneously make them wonder if they were in danger. He didn't even need to say anything to command attention. It was just his style. All right, Jack began, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "First off, I'd like to apologize for any confusion caused by my paper cut yesterday. I promise it wasn't that dramatic. And the whole regenerating death machines thing? I mean, come on. You guys really thought we were secretly immortal?" A murmur of frustration swept through the room. But Jack, as always, kept going. "Let's clear a few things up. No, humans can't grow back limbs. If we could, my hospital shifts would be a lot easier, let me tell you. And no, coffee doesn't actually enhance our healing. It just makes us hyperactive and occasionally prone to making questionable decisions." Lynn, sitting in the front row with her phone poised for maximum capture, couldn't help but laugh. Jack was in full-on chaos mode, and this time it felt like he had the whole room eating out of his hand. But then again, Jack always seemed to know how to turn any situation into an art form. "But," Jack continued, his voice growing more serious now, "the real story here is that human biology is just weird. We heal in ways that other species might find unsettling, sure, but that doesn't make us dangerous. It just means we're good at fixing ourselves when things go wrong. Maybe that's a little out there, but trust me, it's nothing you haven't seen before. Just with more bandages." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, his eyes scanning the room of confused and increasingly anxious alien delegates. "Humans do heal differently, and yeah, we adapt to stress, whether it's muscle strains from exercise or, getting your arm reattached during an elevator malfunction. But the key here is that it's all just part of our biology. Nothing supernatural, nothing out of control." General Blur's form rippled uneasily. "But how do you control this healing? There's no oversight. Your bodies just react." "Yep," Jack said with a grin. "It's like hitting repair on a broken machine. We don't have a manual, but our bodies know what to do. It's not perfect. We get scars, inflammation, a few bumps and bruises along the way, but it works." Ambassador Clix TX stepped forward, antennae twitching nervously. "But what about your exercise adaptation? You deliberately damage your muscles to make them stronger. That's not normal." "Normal for us, though," Jack shrugged, unperturbed. "We do it with something called exercise. We put a little strain on our bodies and they repair themselves. It's how we stay healthy. We don't need synthetic upgrades or artificial bioengineering. Just sweat and muscle. The body knows how to handle the rest." A delegate from the Proxima Centauri system, an overly serious species of towering beings with metallic skin, stood up. So, what you're saying is that you can't be killed because your bodies just keep repairing themselves. Jack rolled his eyes, clearly exasperated by the misconception. No, no, no. If you really wanted to stop us, all you'd need is a big enough problem. We don't regenerate indefinitely, but we sure as hell bounce back quicker than most. Another alien, this one resembling a floating cloud of gas with glowing tendrils, spoke up. But what if you got hurt in the middle of a battle, or while traveling across galaxies? Can you really be considered safe to be around? Jack paused, considering the question for a moment. Look, he said, his tone much softer now. Humans are a lot like most other species. We have our quirks, our imperfections. And yeah, sometimes we heal faster than others, but that doesn't mean we're an unstoppable force. It just means we know how to survive, and that might be a bit alien to you all. He gave a little shrug, his hands still raised in innocence. Nothing more, nothing less. Lynn, who had been recording every word, raised an eyebrow. But let's be honest, she said, leaning forward in her seat. The real issue here isn't that humans heal too well. It's that everyone's so afraid of something they don't understand. The moment they realized that we don't need a committee-approved healing process, they freaked out. General Blur, who had been quietly absorbing the exchange, finally spoke up, their voice shaking slightly. You don't think humans should be contained? Or studied? Jack smiled, his grin wide. I think humans should be understood. You've got to stop seeing us as threats. We're just trying to live our lives, do our jobs, fix our broken arms, and maybe have a laugh or two while doing it. The room fell silent for a moment. Jack's words hung in the air, and for the first time during the emergency session, the delegates began to look at each other in quiet consideration. Maybe, just maybe, they had misinterpreted the whole thing. Maybe humans weren't a threat after all. Ambassador Click's Tex, who had been vibrating with nervous energy, cleared their throat. So, you're saying that humans are not a threat to galactic stability? Jack paused and glanced at Lynn. She gave him a look, one of those looks that said, "You know you're about to get yourself in trouble, right?" "Not unless you count our coffee addiction as a galactic hazard," Jack said with a wink. "But no, we're not a threat." There was a long pause, followed by a collective exhale as the tension slowly began to dissipate. General Blur, though still visibly nervous, seemed to relax slightly. "Then, perhaps we've overreacted." Clickstex nodded, though their antennae were still twitching nervously. "Perhaps. We should consider a new approach. More study, more understanding, and perhaps, just perhaps, no containment." The room, once filled with fear and uncertainty, seemed to calm. Jack looked around at the now relieved delegates, finally allowing himself to relax. "See? That wasn't so bad," he said, turning to Lynn. "I told you all we needed was a little honesty." Lynn smirked, shaking her head. "And a lot of coffee." Jack grinned. "Exactly." The great human healing hysteria had come to an end, not with an explosion of fear, but with a quiet understanding. For now, the galaxy would take a deep breath and move on. But Jack Patterson knew one thing for sure. Next year's conference, it was going to be a lot more interesting. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would finally start to appreciate just how strange and just how resilient humans could be. A week had passed since the great human healing hysteria, and New Singapore General Hospital had returned to its usual state of organized chaos. But the galaxy hadn't forgotten. Oh no, the event was still making waves across the stars, and everywhere Jack went, someone, alien or human, was bringing up the Great Marshmallow Incident of 2074. News outlets were still running endless segments on human biology, and galactic memes about angry flesh and tactical jello were trending across multiple systems. Jack Patterson, ever the master of rolling with the punches, had found himself the subject of more than a few interviews. Each time he'd brush off the hysteria with the ease of someone who had long since learned that being misunderstood was just part of the fun. And besides, it wasn't every day you got to say you caused an interplanetary incident just by being biologically different. "You know," Lynn said one day, leaning against the coffee machine, "you're kind of a galactic sensation now. People are even asking about your coffee." Jack grinned as he sipped from a steaming mug. "They'll be asking for my autograph soon, and they'll probably want a coffee recipe too." Lynn raised an eyebrow. "You're not serious, are you? They really think your coffee is some kind of regeneration serum?" "Why not? If it gets me free coffee across the galaxy, I'm not complaining," Jack said with a shrug. "The more ridiculous, the better." It was true. Jack had become a bit of a hero, an accidental one, sure, but a hero nonetheless. The alien delegates who had once feared human healing were now eager to learn about it. Some had even reached out to Jack for collaborative medical projects, hoping to understand more about how humans adapted and healed under stress. As strange as it was, it looked like humanity had finally earned its place in the galactic community, just not in the way anyone expected. And then there was the official follow-up report. The Galactic Medical Council had conducted its own investigation, though Jack was fairly certain they spent more time dissecting human coffee culture than actual biology. Still, the conclusion was clear. Humans were indeed a unique species, capable of extraordinary biological resilience, but not to the point of becoming death machines as some had feared. The galaxy was officially no longer in a panic. But the strangest thing had happened. After all the turmoil, Jack found himself in an odd position. He had a new purpose, and it wasn't just about surgery or teaching medical students anymore. No, now he was involved in intergalactic bio-research. The humans' unusual healing had sparked real interest from species who had never thought to consider the possibility that biology could function this way. His next few months were going to be filled with video calls and collaborative studies, some of which even involved species with significantly different biology. Still, for Jack, it wasn't about the fame or the newfound galactic recognition. It was the thrill of knowing that despite everything, humans had left a mark on the galaxy, and that mark was filled with laughter, confusion, and a little bit of chaos. Maybe that's just what humanity brought to the table. Disruption in the most delightful sense. "I think you're going to have a lot of new followers," Lynn added, her voice breaking Jack from his thoughts. "You know, on GalacTube. The video of you explaining your healing process is now a sensation. Just reached 50 million views." Jack leaned back, his usual grin spreading across his face. "I'm not surprised. After all, who doesn't want to watch a human talk about growing flesh while catching marshmallows in his mouth?" Lynn chuckled. "You should be more careful about what you say next time. They might start a whole new trend, human regeneration challenges." Jack laughed too, but the thought did cross his mind. What if this was the beginning of something bigger? What if the galaxy, with all its wonders and dangers, had only begun to understand humanity's true value? Sure, it wasn't about saving the galaxy or conquering the stars. It was about being human. Messy, chaotic, unpredictable, but somehow managing to make it all work. "Next year's conference should be interesting," Jack said with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Maybe I'll actually show them what we can do. You know, for science." Lynn smiled, but there was something knowing in her eyes. "Just don't accidentally start another intergalactic incident. I'm not sure I can handle another containment team." Jack shrugged, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. No promises. The galaxy had learned something valuable over the past few days. It wasn't the power of regeneration. It wasn't about humans being better or worse than anyone else. It was that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't a force you could control. It was the unexpected, the unpredictable. Jack Patterson wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was proof that sometimes chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed to grow. And who knew? The next galactic incident might just be because of something as simple as a cup of coffee. And maybe, just maybe, some marshmallows. As Jack looked at the chaos around him, his grin only widened. "Yeah," he said, taking another sip. "Next year's conference? Definitely going to be a lot of fun." And with that, he turned back to his coffee, already plotting what new ridiculous situation he could accidentally cause next. Because if there was one thing Jack Patterson knew, it was that in the great vast expanse of space, you never knew when you'd stumble upon the next big adventure. And that, he thought, was exactly how humans were meant to live.